It's live. Good Vach, Shavua Tov. We're starting off a new week. We're starting it with some beautiful learning. And I was just crushed to come out of Shabbos and learn that Hersh Goldberg-Polin, one of the hostages held by, I don't even want to say their name, held by a force of pure evil. Was the body's been found and he's confirmed dead. And shortly after October 7th, and we learned everything, and when there were still, as far as we knew, over 200 hostages, and it was all very new. I think it was still October, it wasn't even November. There was a Zoom call arranged, I think by a professor from a medical school. I think it was a Harvard Medical School professor, but just arranged a Zoom that we somehow got invited to. It was a psychology professor, a psychiatric professor who was just, whose specialty was people in trauma. And at any rate, the guest of that Zoom was Hersh's mom, who most recently spoke at the Democratic National Convention with her husband, Mrs. Goldberg and Mr. Polin, and they spoke about their son Hersh. But we heard her so soon after it happened, and so we were deeply attached to the fate of all the hostages. But somehow we just felt connected, like. I never met her, I never met him, but we felt connected like they were family friends. And I know that so many Jews around the world had this same feeling, that they were connected to Hersh's mom. And she's been so active on social media. There's an account, Bring Hersh Home, that I've been following on Instagram, and they post every day. And I think she started the tape with how many days they've been captured, they've been in captivity. And she just spoke so eloquently and movingly. I'm just crushed. Every death of every hostage and every soldier and every innocent in any war, but somehow we just felt so much more connected to Hersh and to Hersh's family. And today we came out of Shabbos to learn that he's gone. And so I'm just dedicating tonight's learning to the memory and for the uplift of the soul of Hersh Goldberg-Polin. May his neshama have an aliyah. May his soul have a great elevation, a great elevation in the world of souls. May his family, please God, comfort his family and give them strength at this difficult time. He wasn't the only one who was just found. I saw a headline. There were at least 2 other hostages, and now I just heard maybe some more. But so every soul is precious, but he just happens to be the one I felt so connected to. And so we dedicate our learning tonight to Hersh Goldberg-Polin. May the neshama have an aliyah. Welcome tonight, Sharon, Nina, Guy, Lorraine, Melissa, Bill, Karen, Derek, Chaim in Florida. Welcome. Let's do some learning in Hersh's memory. Please, God, bring home any hostages that are alive. Watch over the Chayalim, the brave forces of the IDF, and end this war with a secure and lasting peace for Eretz Yisrael and Am Yisrael. We say Amen. Okay. Our daf tonight is quite short. It's page 68 here in Tractate Bava Basra, the 23rd volume of the Talmud. And with God's help, we will open and complete Mishnah number 7 here in chapter 4. We pick this up near the top of page 68a. One who sells a city. I was going to call tonight's show The Man Who Sold a City until we heard that news. One who sells a city. Sounds strange. I mean, it's not like, hey, want to buy the Brooklyn Bridge. But really what they mean is like an estate, a manor, a town. I mean, there are towns that are owned by corporations or even by individuals. So it's that kind of a setup. Like somebody owns a large property and there are houses and stores and streets and all kinds of people living there. And it includes, because this was ancient times, thank God this no longer exists, but it includes slaves who were part of the running of the city. So, one who sells a city without specifying what is included in the sale has sold with it the houses, the pits, the ditches and caves, the bathhouses and dovecotes, and the olive presses, and Beit HaShalachim, as will be explained in the Gemara what the Beit HaShalachim is. But when the seller says to the buyer, I am selling you it and everything that is in it, so then even if there were cattle and Canaanite slaves in the city, all these entities are sold as well. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says one who sells a city has sold with it the santar, the meaning of which will be explained in the Gemara. That is the Mishnah. So obviously, if he's selling the city and slaves are included when he says it and everything that is in it, they're his slaves, right? He's not selling the slaves that belong to some other person that was perhaps paying rent in his city. They're his slaves and he's selling them. But if he didn't include it and everything that is in it, then he would have taken his slaves with him when he left the city that he sold. Okay, that's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. Rav Acha, the son of Rav Avia, said to Rav Ashi, learn from the Mishnah that the legal status of a Canaanite slave is like that of movable property. Now, that definitely contradicts what we've learned in the past many times, that in ancient times when slavery existed, the legal status of a Canaanite slave was likened to land and not to movable property. So let's see what's happening here. Learn from it that the legal status of a Canaanite slave is like that of movable property. As if it was like land, then the slave should be sold along with the city. So Rav Ashi responded, rather, what do you claim that the legal status of a Canaanite slave is like that of movable property? If that is the case, what is the meaning of the Mishnah's statement that even if there were cattle and Canaanite slaves in the city, they are all sold? This is obvious, as the slaves should be treated no differently than the rest of the city's movable property. Rather, what have you to say? You must explain that there is a difference between movable property that moves about by itself, such as slaves, and movable property that does not move about by itself, i.e. inanimate objects. And in exactly the same manner, one can claim that even if you say that the legal status of a Canaanite slave is like that of land, there is a difference between land that moves by itself, which is slaves, and land that does not move by itself. Now the Mishnah teaches, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, one who sells a city has sold it with its santar. So the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of santar? So here in Babylonia, right, with the sages living in Bava, they interpreted it to mean the land registrar. So this is the Bar Machavanita, who is in charge of keeping track of property boundaries. So this is very interesting. What they're saying is that this guy who owns a city, like which is to say some kind of a town with many houses, roads, establishments, bathhouses, caves, pitches, ditches, whatever, also includes kind of administrative slaves, right? So there's a slave whose job it is to keep the town defined, maybe to charge, to note who's coming and going, to keep track of the boundaries of the town. He's somebody that it kind of belongs to the city. He does the work of the city, and he's crucial to the proper functioning of the city. So even though he might be a slave of the owner, because his particular duties are so important to the running of the city, so if the owner has sold it and everything in it, it's going to include this, high-level administrative assistant who also happens to be a slave. Now that's according to one definition of this word santar. But Shimon ben Avtolemos disagrees and says that it is referring to the fields that surround the city. So the Gemara comments, the one who says that santar means the land registrar, right, this administrative slave, understands that according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, when one sells a city, all the more so are the fields that surround the city included in the sale. But the one who says that it means the fields that surround the city holds that the land registrar is not sold with the city. Now the Gemara attempts to adduce proof in support of one of these opinions. We learned in the Mishnah here that the olive presses and the Beit HaShalachin are sold along with the city. So the sages initially maintained what is meant by Shalachin, and therefore the Beit Shalachin. So this is referring to irrigated fields, fields that require additional irrigation to supplement the rain that they receive. As it is written, who gives rain upon the earth and sends, sholeach, like shliach, right? One who sends an emissary. The emissary is the shliach. So one who sends is a sholeach, the one and sends water upon the fields. That's from Job 5:10. So granted, according to the one who says that santar means the land registrar, the first Tana of the Mishnah said that the fields that surround the city are sold with the city, but the land registrar is not sold. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel comes to say that even the land registrar is sold, but according to the one who says that the santar means fields, this is what the first Tana is saying as well. So in what way then does Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel disagree with the first Tana? Now the Gemara rejects this as a proof. Do you maintain that what is meant by shalachin is irrigated fields? This is not the case. Rather, what is meant by shalachin? This is referring to gardens found within the city. As it is stated, your shoots, shalachayich, are an orchard of pomegranates from the Song of Songs. But the fields that surround the city are not sold. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel comes to say that even the fields are sold as well. Right, again, what are we discussing? When you sell a city without specification, what is included? What is considered included? Okay, well, everything which is in the boundaries of the city, that's included, though not movable property, just the stuff that is integral to the city. So we're talking about these fields that are around the city, on the outside of the city, are they attached to the city or not? And is this person who's kind of a slave, whose job it is to maintain the borders of the city, is he included, because he's a slave, is he included with the city or not? That's what we're debating. Now, some say that the discussion actually took a different form, and it was like this. The sages initially assumed that what is meant by shalachim, this is referring to gardens found within the city. So granted, according to the one who said that santar means the fields that surround the city, the first Tana of the Mishnah said that the gardens found within... As soon as the door opens, I realize I forgot. Let's light up the darkness. Granted, according to the one who said that santar means the fields that surround the city, the first Tana of the Mishnah said that the gardens found within the city are sold along with the city. But the fields that surround the city are not sold. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel comes to say that even the fields that surround the city are sold along with it. Now it's page 68b. But according to the one who says that santar means the land registrar, so it is reasonable that the first Tana of the Mishnah said that the gardens within the city are included in the sale of the city. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel responded to him that the land registrar is included. Right? In other words, if one thing means gardens, why would the response to that claim be land registrar? How are these two connected? So the Gemara answers, do you maintain that what is meant by shalachin is gardens? This is not the case. Rather, what is meant by shalachin, this is referring to the fields that surround the city. As it is written, who gives rain upon the earth and sends, sholeach, waters upon the field. So, in other words, these fields that require irrigation, and maybe it's this santar, it's this person, the land registrar, whose job it is to make sure that as we're defining the borders of the city, what he's really defining is which fields are getting irrigated by the city's resources. And that's the connection. So according to the first Tana, it is specifically the fields that are sold with the city, but the land registrar is not sold. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel comes to say that even the land registrar is also sold. So the Gemara suggests, come in here a proof from the following Baraisa. Rabbi Yehuda says the santar is not sold with the city, but the city scribe, another kind of administrative slave, is sold with it. So what, is it not clear from the fact that the city scribe is a man, that the santar is also a man? But the Gemara rejects this proof. Are the cases comparable? This case is as it is, and that case is as it is. And the santar means fields and not the land registrar. Why does it have to be that if one says this guy's included but that guy's not, if we don't know what the terms mean, they don't have to be referring to one human is included and one is not. It might be, well, the fields are included, but the guy who defines which fields are included, he's not. Something like that. So the Gemara asks, how can you say that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the fields surrounding the city are not sold along with it? But isn't it taught in the latter clause of this Baraisa? But when one sells a city, he has not sold its remnants and not its daughters. Now, the daughters of a city is not referring to humans at all. Daughters is actually referring to nearby rural villages, and not the woods that are set aside and designated for the city. These are not included, and not the enclosures for animals, for birds, and for fish. And we said in explanation, what is meant by remnants? Bizlay. The Gemara asks, what is the meaning of bizlay? And Rabbi Abba said, the strips of the fields that are separated from the main fields by a stretch that cannot be cultivated. So from here, it may be inferred that it is the strips of the fields that are not sold with the city, but the fields themselves are sold with it. So in other words, fields that seem to be contiguous with this city that's being sold, they're included. But once you get to fields that the owner owns, but are not contiguous with his city, so when he just said, I'm selling the city, they would not be included. Now, needless to say, the buyer and seller of a city should have decided very clearly what was being bought and what was not. But since they did not specify clearly enough, that's why we're figuring it out. So the Gemara suggests, reverse the statement found in the Baraisa so that Rabbi Yehuda says that the santar, which is now understood to mean fields, is sold with the city, but the city scribe is not sold with it. So the Gemara challenges this and says, how can you say that Rabbi Yehuda holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel? To the point that you adduce proof from the words of Rabbi Yehuda with regard to the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. But doesn't Rabbi Yehuda hold in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, meaning the rabbis who disagree with Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel? As it is taught in the latter clause of that same Baraisa that we've been citing, but when one sells a city, he does not sell its remnants, and he does not sell its daughters, which means nearby rural villages. So whereas, with regard to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, doesn't he say that when the one who sold the city sold its daughters along with it, meaning those nearby rural villages? As it is taught in the Baraisa, one who sells a city has not sold its daughters, but Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel disagrees and says one who sells a city has sold its daughters, meaning nearby rural villages. So the Gemara answers, this does not prove that Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, as it may be suggested that Rabbi Yehuda holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel with regard to one issue, that the fields that surround the city are included in the sale, but he disagrees with him with regard to another issue, as according to Rabbi Yehuda, the nearby villages are not sold along with the city. Nearby villages meaning, a bunch of houses that he can rent out to residents and get that income. Now the Baraisa teaches, when one sells a city, he has not sold, among other things, the enclosures for animals, for birds, and for fish. And the Gemara raises a contradiction from another Baraisa. If the city has daughters, i.e. nearby villages, they are not sold along with it. If it has one part on the sea and one part on dry land, or if it has enclosures for animals, for birds, or for fish, these are all sold along with the city. So the Gemara answers, not difficult, la kasha, as a distinction can be made between these different cases, and I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. La kasha. Here, the one Baraisa addresses animal enclosures whose openings face inward, i.e. toward the city, and they are therefore considered part of the city. Whereas there, the other Baraisa addresses animal enclosures whose openings face outward, i.e. away from the city. And therefore, they are not included in its sale. And the Gemara raises a difficulty, but doesn't the Baraisa teach? And he has not sold the woods that are set aside for the city, indicating that they face the city, and nevertheless they are not sold along with the city. And the Gemara answers, say that the Baraisa should be amended so that it reads instead, and he has not sold the woods that are set apart from the city, i.e. that are at a distance and do not face the city. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 7 here in chapter 4. And now you know, if you're ever buying or selling a city, consult with Mishnah number 7 in chapter 4 of Tractate Bava Basra. I'm not seeing any questions being passed over to me by Nina. I'll just give it one more second. But if indeed we're done, then please God, take Hersh Goldberg-Polin up to the highest levels of heaven and admit him to your heavenly academy, and comfort the families of all those families who are devastated to learn that their loved one is gone today. And please God, may we not hear news anymore of dead hostages, only that they've been returned, and that this war has ended with a secure and lasting peace for Eretz Yisrael and Am Yisrael. And we say Amen. Good Vach. Shavua Tov.